Hello, I'm Cameron Beer, and my favourite foreign equine product is AirVent. As well as being full of vitamin C, it is absolutely brilliant for keeping the respiratory system clean and clear. This is really important when you're dealing with pollen in the summer, when the horse's airways are struggling with that. And after a winter we've just had, and they were in much more than we would have liked. A lot of my horses were struggling with a bit of a residual cough, and using AirVent really helped me to clear that up and have my horse's respiratory system back to where I needed it to go eventing.
Welcome back to the Grassroots show, very kindly supported by Foreign Equine. Now, our summers have been getting hotter and hotter. I mean, I don't know what's happening in 2024 because the sun has yet to appear. However, in the past, they have been getting hotter and hotter. So we thought, well, we might try and tempt the sun by doing a show about training and competing in the heat, because it's something that comes up quite often, lots of questions regarding it. So who better to answer them than Spike the vet? Thank you for coming on to chat with me.
Rosie, thank you. Finally made it onto the Grassroots show. It's very kind to be asked on. I quite like being a guest again. It's quite nice rather than the stress of hosting. So yes, far away. Lots of good questions. Good topic this.
Well, I want to start with breeds because, as you know, at grassroots level, there is so many different types of breeds of horses that can compete. It's such an open sport, open to anybody. Is there any specific considerations for certain breeds when it comes to heat management?
Specifically with heat management, probably not. But I do think that from the point of view of their ability to exercise at speed, then yes, we have the thoroughbred breed, which have been bred to and designed and selectively bred to be able to gallop fast in straight lines. And therefore, they are going to be far more capable of exercising comfortably rather than a horse that's not necessarily designed to do that. So, and I think, therefore, there is probably a breed disposition. And I think that's, equally in their capabilities of, doing galloping and recovering and the level of fitness that you need to prepare for before embarking on competition. Look, we're in the middle of the season now, and most horses should have an element of ingrained fitness. And I do feel quite strongly that I think a lot of the time our grassroots horses, we need to be a little bit careful that we don't do over fitness. We don't get them too fit. Sometimes it can be quite easy to feel that we need to copy what is done by the professionals, and you see them out galloping every 4 days, which is the routine for high level event horses. But actually, if a horse is in good, consistent work, where they are worked and sweat at the end of it, they don't just work and come back in and everything's all very easy. They should have a degree of inbuilt fitness, whether that be musculoskeletally or whether that's aerobic as well. So they should be able to handle that. Now, from the point of view of managing heat, I think you said in the intro, it's hopefully we might have some sun again this summer. It feels pretty cold, but I think one of the real challenges from eventing in England is that it can be quite variable. That acclimatization to managing heat, if you are in a hotter climate, is easier because they are, day to day, they're managing it. Their coat is, manages equivalently. They're not trying to grow a winter coat in the middle of the, in June or July because it's 6 degrees at night or whatever craziness we had in June. So I think that's challenging. And I think that's where I would say people need to be very aware of. Last week, even though I was enjoying a lovely holiday in Scotland, where it remained cold, I was told that down south it crept up to the high 20s for 2 days, and then it's gone again. We're now 10, 12 degrees colder. So I think that needs to be taken into that to me is that serious consideration of that variability in temperature that you get in a classic English summer, that it can get roaring hot for a week, and those horses are not acclimatized to that. If we're in a serious time where we might get a whole month where it stays hot, then they've got a time period to get acclimatized to that.
That's the problem with the UK, is it's so up and down. You have, you used to pack your winter wardrobe away and bring your summer clothes out, whereas now you've got to keep it all because who knows what it's going to be when you wake up in the morning. And it's, like you say, hard for the horses to adjust. And we're talking training there as well. I've heard lots of different people say different things about training when it gets hot, because I've heard people who like to get up at the crack of dawn and like to ride and train when it's cool or right in the evening. And then other people say train any time of the day because you don't know when your times are going to be at an event. You could be going cross country at 12 o'clock midday. What's your views on training in the heat when you're preparing for a grassroots show?
First off, there's training and there's training. depends what you're planning for that day. So if that's it's a dressage lesson or it's an intense bit of work, then probably doing it out of the blazing heat of the sun is probably sensible, because the horse is going to have to work a bit harder anyway. It's a peak in your training program, and therefore trying to avoid the exertion of doing it in the middle of the day is a good idea. If it is an easier day, strength and conditioning day, I'm going to do what the physio has asked me to do for a day, or going for a hack day, I would see no issue with them doing that in the warmer part of the day, because you're not challenging their ability to handle the heat as much. So, and I think it goes back to that little bit what I was mentioning before. If we're in the middle of a drought, we've got a period of protracted hot weather, then I think avoiding the heat of the day is a good idea. Whereas, if it's the odd day or other, then I don't think it's a massive situation. So yeah, it's a little bit of prior planning. It's a little bit of where you're sitting in your training schedule. But I think you're right. I like that thing. You don't know what times you're going to get. You might be doing a dressage test at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it might have crept up into the early 30s, and the horse hasn't worked that hard in that degree of heat before, and suddenly it's lazy off the leg and it's a bit flat, and you've done your usual half an hour warm up, and you've done your dressage test 20 minutes ago in the warm up, and you've lost it all. So I think there is a lot of that prior planning and knowing how your own individual horse does handle heat. So I think it's all about prior planning and understanding each horse is individual. And that would be, I think that's probably the most sensible approach to it, really. Realistically, we're not in a situation here where we're talking about galloping our Tokyo Olympic horses in the heat of the day in England with a rug on, so they're prepared to be able to gallop in the heat of the day in Japan. No, we're not asking them to do that. We shouldn't be stretching the metabolic capabilities of our horses doing that. But we are still asking good questions of them. And every time a horse sweats, then they are using their electrolytes. We are altering their metabolism. We're altering their ability to, with their sweating, they're losing various different electrolytes. We're then asking their body to get that back to normal through homeostasis. So that, we need to be sensible. And I think hopefully we can maybe guide with a few bits of advice here.
It's finding the right plan for you and your horse. It's all very personal and specific as to obviously your goals and how you're working your horse. But you mentioned electrolytes there, Spike. Is there anything us riders can do with our nutrition and hydration of our horses to help them and assist them during the summer months? Because we hear electrolytes thrown around a lot. Are they something that they should be on the whole time, or is that just the heat's come out, let's throw an electrolyte in? Yeah,
good. That's a very good question, and it's probably a little bit debatable. I think for what we're looking at here, from the perspective of grassroots, where we don't have that higher intensity of daily exercise, then it's more a matter of replacing used electrolytes after exercise. So, but equally in the build up to a big competition, whether that might be some champs or anything like that, and every day you're working harder and your horse might be sweating every day, daily electrolytes are therefore required, or anticipating that horse is going to sweat. The thing is, if you give a horse various amounts of electrolytes, the body is designed through the kidneys to level it all out again, depending on what they actually need. But if they haven't actually needed more sodium because they've done sweating, then they'll just kick them out through their urine and get rid of it. So it's more about replacing what they've lost rather than necessarily preloading. The only counter effect to that is that there definitely are some supplements out there, particularly electrolyte supplements, that talk about that they may stay within the intestinal tract, so sit in the large colon, so that when they exercise, they might draw more electrolytes from within the colon as the hydration status changes. So some of them can be quite clever where they sit within the system. But generally, I would say you replace what you've used rather than giving it the night before.
And do you have any top tips on horses that might be a little bit difficult at drinking? Because obviously we want to keep replenishing water the whole time into our horses when it does get hot. And obviously if they're thirsty, they drink. Sometimes horses can be a little bit challenging at not wanting to drink.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can train them. You can. Apple bobbing, lots of your succulent vegetables, so carrots and apples and things like that, can encourage them to drink. And also they've got more moisture in it. damp the feed down. Mashes can be really effective at doing that. You're increasing your water intake, but along with the bran, you'll have an effect on the amount of moisture within the intestinal tract again. Soaking hay, if horses will eat soaked hay, some will turn their nose up at it, but again, it's another way of getting moisture into them. Grass is usually higher in moisture than anything else. Grass right now, as it is in the beginning of July, is actually quite poor because I think it's quite dry. Even though it's been quite cold, it's pretty dry out there, and there probably isn't a high moisture content in the grass in the fields at the moment. So yeah, they would be the ones. And every horse is different. I mean, we've got horses at home here that you give them beautiful, fresh drinking water in their stable, and they turn their nose up at it. And the moment you turn them out, they go and have a belly full of water from the stinking trough in the corner. You get to know what's different for your own horse about when they're going to drink and what they might want to drink. But staying on top of it and monitoring that is really important, particularly urination and then colour of their urine. We want that to stay sort of straw-coloured light yellow. If that's in any way concentrating and getting darker, thicker, then you're behind with your hydration status. And that's particularly relevant if you start stabling away. Maybe you might be travelling a little bit further for a competition with an overnight stay. Monitoring that water intake is really important. On average, a horse that's not overly sweating should be getting for let's say a 500 kilo horse, it's 2 mil per kilo per hour. So that's a bit of mental arithmetic. So that's about 2 mils, so 500 kilos. So that's about 2 litres. So it's about 48. So it's about 50 litres a day in drinking water they should have to maintain themselves, and then other losses on top of that. So you can have an idea of whether you're winning or losing by monitoring that with your buckets of water and your intake from that point of view. People talk about a bit of salt in the feed. I wouldn't get too carried away with that. We just had a little discussion about electrolytes and electrolyte balance. You are artificially, therefore, increasing their sodium and chlorine input by putting salt in their feed, which is what salt is. But it is actually quite a nice little technique that does make them thirstier. And they will then have a drink if they've got a little bit of salt, as long as they don't turn their nose up at it. So, yeah, they would probably be a few little things to stay on top of. The old-fashioned have a pinch of their skin and see if they're hydrated just isn't real. just isn't. Yeah, the better impression is actually look at their gums. They will go dry. But again, that can be tricky to tell whether that they're dry. If you've got dry gums, they're usually pretty dehydrated by that point. More is monitoring their volume of water and their urine. There's an easier way of following it.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you about the key signs of dehydration, because you do hear a lot that pinch the skin.
Everyone loves a little pinch of the skin. Monitoring their urine, I think that's a really important thing. See, what they, with that the urine color and consistency is lovely. But yeah, when they're dehydrated, it goes much darker and it goes quite thick and potentially a bit, almost syrupy as well when they really are dehydrated. And if you're ever in a situation where it's gone even darker than that, and if not brown, then that's not good at all. You're into the realms of muscle disease and muscle damage. So yeah, frequency of urination and volume of not necessarily volume, that's hard to monitor, but volume of water intake.
We'll have our riders out there with buckets measuring urine in a minute, going, "Oh, how much today?"
It's what I advise pro riders going to big 3 to 3 days, monitoring, keeping a close eye on their urine. Are they urinating at the normal times? Most horses will normally exercise, come in and have a wee on their fresh bed. Are they following their normal routine of what they're doing? And that will tell you. So yeah, no, it's the advice that goes up and down the levels, and that's horses, isn't it? Grassroots is still, it is in intensity of exercise for these horses, and everyone is competitive. Everyone wants to win. Everyone wants to do the best they possibly can. And actually the advice is very similar. They still need the same attention to detail.
Now, traveling in the heat. In the UK, we're very lucky that a lot of our grassroots events are relatively local. Lots of people don't have to stop very frequently when going to events. I know in the US, they travel hours and hours to get to an event. What are your top tips for traveling when it gets hot? Because it can be knowing how many times you've got to stop, when to give them water, things like that can be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, you're right. We're very lucky, aren't we, in this country that we can compete quite so locally. I know there's regions of the country that feel a little bit left out when you talk about that, but equally, we don't have to go too far. And if we look at our compatriots in other countries, but that are driving 6 to 10 hours just to go and do a one-day event, we are well served here. Yeah, it sticks to that hydration is so key. The things that we're worrying about with over a longer distance, is muscle function, so therefore hydration status there, and also lung function and the risk of it getting any cough or shipping fever. So they would be the two things from a purely medical perspective. I think realistically, we're doing less than 4 hours. I think most horses should be more than capable of doing it. Sensible driving, not rocking them around too much. They're not having to do too much bracing. Finding, it's not as though most people can go, well, shall I take the lorry today or the trailer? We've got what we've got, but also planning around times a day of traveling. Even if you've got your dressage is at 11 and you're competing on a Friday, you probably don't want to be traveling between 8 and 9 because you might get stuck in traffic. And just prior planning, and just trying to put things in your favor. And knowing each horse, some horses will travel for 3 hours and put their nose down at the other end, and you get a lot of white mucus out. If that's the case, you want to give your horse more time to recover when you arrive at a competition so that you can get them out, walk them around, give them a graze, allow that mucus to come out. If you've got a horse that's got no concerns with any of that perspective, then I think you can just be sensible, make sure they've had a breakfast before you get on, give them a bit of forage while you're traveling, and away you go.
Now, when you get to your show, or if you're going to training or something like that, mainly if you're at a show and it's a scorching hot day, would you change any timings of your warm-up, or would you keep that the same before each phase? Would you ever make them reduced because of the heat, or would you think, no, I've planned for this, I've trained for this, we're going to be okay?
Dressage is a tricky one because it depends on how easy your horse finds dressage, I think. There's some horses that put a lot of effort into trying to do it properly for you, and they only have a certain amount of time they can hold that outline and do that for you, depending on their age and their ability to do it. So your classic warm blood that finds it a little bit easier versus your more traditionally bred horse or your thoroughbred that finds it harder. You don't want those muscles to have to work for longer, and the hotter it is, the harder they're going to find it. So maybe I would be adjusting that. But that's what we were saying right at the beginning about preparation and acclimatization. I think that practicing a dressage warm up and doing some dressage lessons in the middle of the heat of the day, and you find that you only get about 15 minutes of work before the horse finds it too difficult, that gives you an idea of how you might adjust your warm up on that occasion in August when you are doing your dressage at 1 o'clock. So yeah, that would be very much the case. Show jumping is probably a little bit easier. They're not necessarily, that should be within their comfort zone. Cross country, definitely on a hot day, I would also consider just giving them a bit of a wash off before you go, warm them up, give them a little bit of a wash off, get some more, cold water on them, to just reduce that temperature a little bit before you then start going cross country. So there's definitely again, stealing the information that the guys are doing at the higher levels. There was a lot of discussion in doing that in Tokyo, was allowing the horses to warm up, then having a period of time of cooling them down again to just get that body temperature down, and then getting, and then leaving the start box. And I think that's applicable to horses at every level. I remember a pony Europeans a few years ago in Arezzo in Italy, and it was baking hot. And I think there they did the same thing. They warmed the ponies up before cross country, and then they all, they were then stood in the shade that they could find, washed down, cooled down, and then prepared to go cross country with a different warm up routine. So yeah, I think that's adapting what you're doing. And I'm also a believer. Look, I'm no coach, but just make sure that you really think about what you're achieving in the warm up for cross country. I see some horses that are just round in circles and jump, and round in circles and jump, round in circles. And, what are we actually preparing for? What, for every jump and for every time I'm doing it, I'm asking my horse to do something and use muscles and use energy. On a hot day, am I going to warm up for as long and challenge its muscle strength and durability? Probably not. So yeah, I think it's adapting to that and having genuine forethought about what you're doing.
Yeah, like you say, the pre-planning and the making sure that you've got the right plan for your horse on the day so that you have as much horse as possible when you get to that final phase. And talking of cross country, because cooling off after cross country, obviously is so important because that's when they get the warmest. But I hear so many different things on whether people just chuck water on and keep chucking water on. Do you scrape water off? What would be the best way to cool a horse after cross country?
David Marlin has done lots and lots of work on this. he's a legend. He's a legend in the sort of the horse physiology world and the stuff that he's done. He is strongly of the opinion, and therefore we should follow, that continually applying cold water without scraping is the best way of cooling a horse. The only thing I would say to that is not everywhere we go has copious amounts of cold water to keep throwing on your horse. We're not at Burley, we're not at Badminton, where we've got iced cold water troughs and 10 helpers chucking water at a horse. So I think you can have, be sensible, slow down that process, do it a little bit, get the water on, put your hand under their belly and feel the heat of the water that's coming off. If that's running off warm, then I tend to like to get that off and put a bit of cold water back on again. That has taken some heat out of the horse. Equally, David Martin would be of the opinion that even leaving that warm water on will continue to drag heat out of the horse. Make sure you've got water at the finish and cool your horse off. The little minute details of which is ultimately the best is probably by the by. What is not ideal is what you sometimes see where there is no cooling done at all. The other thing I would say is get those tendon boots off. I think we know there's a lot of strong evidence that says that tendon injuries are due to chronic recurrent damage within the center of tendons, and heat in there is not good, and therefore getting heat out of legs quickly. And it's a bit of a bugbear of mine that I see horses with their cross-country boots on for too long. I get them off, get some cold water on them and try and get some heat out of those legs pretty quickly. So that would be another area to consider. And in the immediate aftermath of finishing the cross-country.
And walking, I can imagine, is just so key for getting them cool.
Yeah, so the idea that by walking them, you expand their capillaries under the skin, which then is where the heat is within the bloodstream, and then that's then what is then conducted out through the cold water. I think a lot of the time we don't cool our horses down very well. We come through the finish flags, we're very chuffed, and we put it up to walk and jump off and off we go. I think that there could be a little bit of sense. There's a lot of sense in actually just trotting around a little bit, just allowing that horse to just stretch, rather than going from, gallop to walk to stop within a couple of minutes, probably less sometimes. I think that we're probably not great at that in eventers. It's not like we finished Badminton and we just need to get them bloody, really cold really quickly. I think, allowing those muscles, if any lactic acid is built up, allowing the horse to stretch, allowing, keep going with a little bit of slow canter, but definitely trotting around a little bit on a loose rein, maybe not too loose, because you might find as they're tired, they might just trip over and things like that. Just hold them together a little bit. But I think cooling down is actually a musculoskeletal thing, rather than just thinking about how physically hot they are. I know we're talking about doing this on a hot day, and that would be our first thoughts, but actually muscle recovery is important as well. And not going from gallop to stop is advisable.
Would you recommend icing and cooling the legs or not?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very sensible thing to do. You gallop, whether you've done an 80 centimeters or 100 centimeters or whatever it is, you still galloped for 5 minutes. You have stretched that piece of elastic or multiple pieces of elastic in their tendon however many times. You've only got to, if you get an elastic band and you keep stretching it and you feel the middle of it, that is hot, and there you do get ingrained heat within these elastic structures. So yes, I would highly recommend that. We see soft tissue injuries in horses all the way up through the grades. So it is very important to get heat and ingrained heat out those legs. So yes, I would ice. There's some interesting stuff out there about icing. I mean, I'm an advocate of half an hour on, half an hour off, so you don't burn the skin. Maybe not the world, it's probably not the podcast to talk about it, but there's some muted changes within the FEI regulations about the amount of time horses are going to be allowed to be iced that are threatening to be brought in, because there are, national federations that are worried about horses being over-iced and the negative effects that can be of numbing legs that are then doing things. But anyway, for what we're doing, yes, get heat out of legs, 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off, so you don't have risk damaging the skin. I like ice cube bags. They're cheap, they're easy, they're not altogether easy if you are in the middle of a field and you've had to take the bags out of a freezer in the morning. But there's some very good ice, freezer boxes now. I mean, there's a massive Yeti stand at Badminton this year with these, and they're very, very good. It's amazing how long those ice cube bags can stay frozen for in them. Some of them come on wheels with handles. Fill one of them up. Stick them in the back of the 4x4 when you're off with your trailer, and you'll have some ice to use later in the day. So, yeah, definitely the front legs. If you've got limited ice, then definitely the front legs, and then other stuff outside of that. There's various cooling bandages and boots and vibey things and all that sort of stuff. Fine, if you want to, but just get them cold.
Now, you've given us some amazing advice. Do you think you could summarize to 3 top tips for our listeners? No.
When has a vet ever summarized to make it really simple? No, go on. 3 top tips for
3 top tips for training and competing in the heat.
Just the 3. I do think acclimatization is sensible. I think that you need to, if you avoid working in the heat all of the time, then your horse will be surprised by it when ultimately you end up competing in it. So I think there does need to be a degree of training them at a hotter part of the day as well, but be sensible. Don't do that every day. It will, doing it on occasion will give you good information about how you might prepare your warm up in each of the 3 phases, and will also prepare your horse for when they have to compete in that. So that a degree of acclimatization is really sensible. 2, cool them down quickly and efficiently afterwards with what availability you have to use, whether that be water and ice on the legs. And then 3, consider your electrolyte support for a horse. Whenever your horse sweats significantly, electrolyte supplementation is recommended, and doing it afterwards is in general what we'll be looking at here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Spike. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and we've loved hearing all your advice.
Not a problem, Rosie. It's a pleasure to come on and be a guest.
Thank you so much for coming on. Listeners, thank you for tuning in as well. And of course, a huge thanks to Foreign Equine, who are continuing to support the Grassroots show. It won't be long before we're back with another, so stay tuned for that, listeners. But for now, that's all we've got time for.